Hi everybody. I'm going to be giving you a little bit of an introduction for Lab 3. Where we are going to start is right here on Part B, where it talks about the difference of homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive, phenotypes, genotypes. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what those terms mean. This is just background information for when you have to do the allele game. The instructions will be in the lab manual. Just follow those along. All right. So just some basic things about genetics. There are two terms we have to first define. The first definition is phenotype, and that is contrasted with genotype. So a phenotype is the physical characteristics of an organism. This is what you see. So for example, with humans, you might have something called a widow's peak. A widow's peak comes on your hairline and comes to a little point. I don't have a widow's peak, so I do not have that phenotype. There are other ones like tongue rolling. So I can roll my tongue. If you can roll your tongue, that is a phenotype. Whether you can or can't roll your tongue. Some people cannot roll their tongue, and it kind of looks like this because you can't roll your tongue. Those are the physical characteristics. So what you see. Other ones, hair color, eye color, pigmentation of your skin, those are all physical characteristics, and we would call those phenotypes. The phenotype is determined by the genes that you possess, and those are called genotypes. So the genes that control the phenotype. So you can have a gene that will allow you to have a certain color eye. So you can have a gene that produces the brown eye, or a gene produces the blue eye. Those are your genotypes. And so when we talk about genotypes, we talk about them in terms of letters. So there's two different letters that you can have. You can have an uppercase letter, or you can have a lowercase letter. If you have an uppercase letter, we call that dominant. And if you have a lowercase letter, we call that recessive. So if you have the uppercase letter, you will see that trait. So if you have the gene that is uppercase, you will see that trait. If you have a gene that is lowercase, you may not see that trait. It all depends if you have that dominant allele. And so that last definition, allele, is the variant of a gene. So whether you have the uppercase letter or the lowercase letter. So I'll give you some examples of what I mean. You can have, if you have a big A, let's say that is brown eyes, and we'll change the letter to an E for eyes. If you have the lowercase letter, that equals blue eyes. So you can think to yourself, what would somebody be if they had, and I'm just going to put this down here, example. What would somebody be if they had a big E? What would be their phenotype? And their phenotype would be that they would have brown eyes because they have this genotype. They have this allele, the big E allele, which means they have brown eyes. And if they have a small e, they would have blue eyes, right? Because they don't have the brown allele. They don't have the big E. And so this is really simple right now because we're only looking at one single letter. But in humans, you actually have two letters. You have a letter that comes from, you have one gene that comes from your mom and one gene that comes from your dad. So you actually have two copies of every single gene in your body, except for like the sex chromosomes, which we'll get into later. But for most of the traits of your body, you have two copies of that gene. One comes from mom and one comes from dad. So it would be better to see something like this. So you can have this set of genes, what color eye would this be? And so because it has the big E, that means it is brown eyes. You could have a big E, small e. What color eyes would that be? And because it has the big E, the dominant allele in it, we are always going to see the dominant allele. So that would be brown eyes. Or what about small e? What color eyes would that be? And because you don't have the brown eye allele, because you don't have a big E, that would be blue eyes. So we have terms for these genes, for these genetic sets. If you have big E, we call that homozygous dominant. The term homo means same. So they're the same, and then zygous is genes, so they're the same genes, and they're dominant. They're the big E. If you have the small e, we call that homozygous recessive, because they are both the same. So that means here's the homo, they're both the same, and they're the recessive allele. Now you have big E, small e, and that is called heterozygous. And we call this heterozygous because hetero means other. So there's two other types of alleles. You have a dominant allele and you have the recessive allele. And because they're both different from each other, we call that heterozygous. So using this information, you are going to answer several questions that are directly below in the lab manual. So I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, reach out to your lab instructor. Thank you.